thank you so much for participating on such short notice, so I really appreciate that. All right, so I wanted to give as much time to students for questions. So I do have some questions, but I thought I would ask a student to come up as close to the computer and ask a question. So who would like to ask the first question?
Hello, I'm Winnie and I'm a student here at Georgia Tech. So my question for you is, the first of the Ten Commandments I saw is no research, correct? So since you typically do documentaries, how does that change the way your documentaries are, or rather, the way your documentaries convey the message you're trying to, as compared to others that do research and try and kind of convey a topic as accurately as possible?
Yes. Well, the reason why I came up with 10 Commandments was that because of the experience I had with TV productions, I used to direct TV shows for NHK, mostly for NHK. It's a public network in Japan. It's kind of like a BBC of Japan. And when I was making documentaries for them, I was required to do a lot of research before shooting and write a detailed script, which has beginning, middle, and end. And I even was required to write narrations before shooting. And so, which means I have a complete blueprint of the film before you even shoot. And this script needs to be approved by so many layers of producers on the network, which means once it's approved and you go out and shoot, it's very hard to change it, because if you're shooting something else, they won't be happy, right? Because the script is already approved, and it went through lots of bureaucracy, like layers of approval. And so, which gives me a dilemma, even if you go and shoot, and because it's a documentary, you see something you didn't expect. The reality is much richer than your prediction and preconception. And the beauty of documentary is you can learn so much by rolling the camera and discover something you didn't expect. But if you do that, it becomes different from what you wrote. And I was often ordered to go back to shoot because I shot something else. But I think it was kind of ridiculous, and I wanted to do the opposite. Meaning, I tried to limit my preconception as much as possible and minimize my preconception and be open to whatever happens in front of the camera. So one way is to just forget about research. Just roll the camera and see what happens.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Kevin Ju. I am a fourth-year student here at Georgia Tech. I really enjoyed that documentary, and this is more specific to the documentary. Since you're there in person rolling the camera, were there any stories that sort of affected you more strongly than others? And if so, how did that sort of impact you when you were editing and making the documentary?
I see. Well, actually, I was with most of the time. I was rolling the camera and recording the sound, and most of the time, actually, I was with my wife and producer Kyoko, because Kyoko's mother was the reason I got to know Dr. Yamamoto. Kyoko's mother is a social worker, and she and Dr. Yamamoto of the clinic often work together. And that's how I got to know the clinic and the patients. And so Kyoko knew some of the patients. and also knew well about the doctor. So she was often with me when I was rolling the camera. And it was actually Kyoko who was affected by many stories we were listening to. I wasn't affected too much because, in a sense, I'm kind of protected by the camera. I'm holding the camera and I'm manipulating it. I need to focus on so many things at the same time. Not only the stories I'm listening to, but Kyoko was in a direct contact. She was listening to these stories, directly, without the camera. So she got really affected, and she became, quite sick actually. And she made an appointment with Dr. Yamamoto. And it took her, few months to recover from it. And so yeah, that was, quite difficult to deal with actually.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank
Sure.
you. I'm not sure if you can... Hello.
Hi.
So my question is, how did you get interested in, I guess, mental health and mental illness? And then when you got, did you already have connections within the hospital or in the clinic? And were there any ethical concerns in going in? Did you have to ask the patients to record? So yeah.
Right. Initial experience, which kind of worked as a background for my interest, was my personal experience. When I was a student, like you, I was around 20 years old. I was studying religion at the Tokyo University, and at the same time, I was the editor-in-chief of a new student newspaper. And this student newspaper's job was really, really heavy duty, and I was working day and night, and it was a lot of pressure. I was the editor-in-chief, and one day I found myself not functioning at all. When I tried to write articles, I felt like throwing up. And I noticed it was not a physical problem I had. I had an issue with my psychological things. So what I did was I immediately went to see a doctor at a mental clinic on site at the campus. And the doctor said to me, "You have a burnout syndrome." I don't know if you have heard burnout, if you ever heard the word burnout syndrome. It's a syndrome which, overworked salarymen, often get diagnosed with. They work too hard and they use too much mental energy to just burn out. And I was diagnosed with that. And I immediately, quit the newspaper and took a rest. And I quickly recovered, in a week or so, But that kind of gave me a deeper impression on me, because I thought, mental disorder or mental illness is something that somebody it's very different from, it's somebody else's problem. That's what I kind of emerged, that's what I thought. But it's not. Anybody can be, can have, the same problem. And it's really a matter of the situation and also how you deal with it. So, that kind of gave me, that changed my perception towards mental disorders. And also, I was curious why people told me, when I told my friends that I went to a mental clinic, some, friends tease me, these are places you are not going, you don't go to voluntarily. It's somewhere you are forced to go. Usually, that's what they told me. And when I heard that, I felt kind of strange because if you have a toothache, you go to a dentist, right?
Right.
I mean, you're not forced to go to, nobody doesn't have to, force you to go to a dentist. But if you have a, mental disorder, why you are forced to, to go? And unless you're forced to go, you shouldn't go. So, I realized it's really stigmatized and it's considered something shameful. And so that kind of stayed within me. And but when I was working as a TV director, and I was thinking about starting my own film house, I got to know the clinic through Kyoko's mother because she often talked about her experience spending time with the patients. And that kind of gave me an inspiration. Maybe my first film, my first own film, could be about that clinic or the world of the patients. So actually, my first film, Campaign, and Mental were shot at the same time. And I finished Campaign first. That's why it became my first film. But Mental was actually being shot at the same time. And so you had another question, right?
It was concerning the ethical, but it was concerning like ethical concerns and going into like the hospital.
Right.
Thank you. You can
Yeah.
Okay.
Hi, my name is Yendi. I had really enjoyed the film and stuff like that. I'm currently actually studying psychology here, and I was just wondering, do you think that your film has made the type of impact that you wanted in terms of audiences or the message that you might want to portray through your film?
Right. Well, when I make films, my purpose is not necessarily a social change. My purpose is to depict my experience in a cinematic reality so that I could share it with the audience. So what I try to convey is not a message or ideology or anything. It's about my experience. My purpose is to convey my experience to the audience. So that's the initial purpose, and I think I was able to do that with this film. At the same time, as a consequence of conveying my experience to the audience, it might have some sort of a social impact as well, as a consequence. And that, I think, has been also made. I mean, I think there are some social impacts, especially because before this film, almost all the documentaries you see on TV about mental illness or anything that featured people with mental illness, they usually have blurry effect on their faces, and they change their voices to hide their identities. But I didn't want to do it because, I was determined not to do it, because if you do that, it actually strengthens the stigma attached to the illness. Because you are almost saying that they have an illness which is too shameful to show on screen, right? So I didn't want to do that, and also I wanted to depict them as a human being. So without a human face, it's impossible to depict them as human beings. Almost, right? Almost impossible. At least it reduces a lot of humanity by putting these blur effects. So it took a lot of courage for the patients and the doctor and for me, because we are showing who they are without, hiding them. So, and then it was not done, very often. So we were all scared, but we were able to do it. So Dr. Yamamoto told me that he's been watching lots of documentaries after this film produced in Japan, and he says it's visibly less and less that the people, filmmakers are using blurry effects on the patients, which means, I think the film kind of opened up the possibility of depicting them as human beings.
Hi,
Hello.
my name is Horace. I'm a second year at Georgia Tech. So the documentary, in terms of like the shooting process, when you do the A roll and the B roll, do you shoot the A roll first and then fill in the gaps with the B roll, or take like a collection of B roll and then tailor it to afterwards?
Do you make are you a filmmaker?
Yeah, I make videos, so I'm just kind of curious about that.
Because A-roll, B-roll is a terminology in the video making. So are you guys all familiar with A-roll and B-roll?
Or shake your head no, probably.
Okay, A-roll is usually an interview, right? And the B-roll is whatever the visual materials to support the interview. That's how, usually defined. And in my case, I don't really distinguish at all. A-roll and B-roll. Whatever I'm doing is, I call my films observational films, right? And what's important for me is to observe what's in front of the camera while holding the camera, and also while I'm editing. And when I say observation, it doesn't mean being distant or being a third party. It is about looking and listening carefully and attentively. So when I'm rolling the camera, I try to look and listen carefully. And when I see somebody's subtle facial expression is important right now, then I sometimes make a decision to go closer to that person's face, right? And if I think, there are two people talking, and the relationship between these people are the most important right now, then I go wider to have both of them in the one frame. So depending on what I see and what I discover in that scene, that dictates my camera work. So I'm not really doing now I'm doing wide shot, I'm doing close up, I'm not doing that. It's everything is spontaneous. Everything is all about. I observe the situation and translate into a visual language.
Okay. So I was just kind of curious because for some of like the B-roll shots, or like even if you don't like distinguish like the shots where
Right.
it wasn't focused on the person, I remember distinctly there was like a scene that was just like a beetle crawling across the floor while the person was talking about the disease that she had. And I was just wondering if like in the shots where like you just shoot just things, if that's like already from like some clips that you shot in the past, or if you shot it specifically to fill in for those speaking moments.
These shots are. I take these shots when I feel like when I'm shooting with people, I'm mostly concerned about the people in front of me, right? But when I'm getting out of the clinic or when I have some free time, I try to shoot whatever the sceneries or objects or bugs or cats who are around, and whatever interests me, I roll it, I take a shot. And later on in the editing, sometimes I decide to insert them to whatever I shot with people. So yeah, that's how that's the process I usually take.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you.
Okay,
so
sure.
we're approaching.
Hi, I'm Joshua Lundergan. I'm also a fourth-year student here at Tech. I wanted to know, what informed your selection of which stories you wanted to show in the film?
You mean in the editing? You mean which scenes to be in the film and?
How did you decide which patients' interviews you wanted to show?
Okay. First of all, when I decide which patients to shoot, I have no choice, because basically the process was first I asked Dr. Yamamoto to give me a permission to shoot, and then Dr. Yamamoto is a doctor who believes that patients need to decide whatever they want to do. So he asked the Patients Association to discuss the matter, whether they would accept me, and the camera or not. And so they discussed it. Remember, there was a scene where patients were talking about, the change of the laws. That's the Patients Association. And in that association, they discussed whether they would accept me and Kyoko with the camera in the clinic one. And they decided, okay, yeah, you can come in with the camera, but please get permission from each patient. And that's fair. So we decided to come in with the camera, and we talked to each and every patient to introduce ourselves and to get permission. But most of the patients, maybe 8 or 9 out of 10 people we talked to, they said no. They don't want to be in the film because sometimes they don't even tell their parents that they have illness, or colleagues. They don't tell their colleagues or bosses that they have illnesses, or some of the patients are running away from their abusive husband. So, there are many situations and also social stigma that prevents them to appear on the film. So, whenever people said yes to the camera, I didn't really even think about, choosing. It's inevitable that whoever said yes has to be our characters. And we shot, so we shot, that was the way we shot. And in the editing, my process of editing is that, first I see everything, all the footage. In this case, I shot about 70 hours of footage. And I transcribe everything, and watch everything real time. And I start editing whatever the most interesting scenes first, regardless of when it happened. And after, so I edit each scene like one by one, right? This one, okay, and next one. And I end up having about 70, 80 usable scenes. And I put them together in one sequence. That becomes my first rough cut. And then the first rough cut is usually a disaster. So I need to work on it. So I shuffle them around. Sometimes I add scenes, sometimes I take out scenes, and that becomes the second cut. I'm still not happy, then I work on the third cut, fourth cut, and so on. And meanwhile, I kind of by doing that, I discover the theme of the film, and I try to kind of refine it, based on what I discovered. So that's the process. So it's to answer your question, it's a balance. First, I need to, feel, well, this story or this scene is interesting, or cinematic, or drawn. But at the same time, it needs to work with other scenes. No matter how this scene is interesting, it might not fit to the whole structure. So it's a balance between how strong the scene is, and also how it could work with other scenes.
Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you
Sure.
so much for letting us show your film and for answering all the questions from the students. So let's say thank you to Director Soda for... So you can't quite see all the students. Most of them are, as you see, hiding in the back. Okay, so I will... Yeah. So thank you again, and I will
Thank
send
you.
you a